The train that came through Blackwater Pass at 2:13 a.m. had no lights inside it. No cabin glow behind the windows, no signal lamps near the engine, no engineer visible through the windshield. Just a massive black shape dragging itself slowly through the snowfall while every relay panel inside the station flashed red warnings at once. Track 4 fault. Switch failure on line 2. Signal interruption across the western corridor. But track 7 remained solid green, glowing steadily through the storm like it had been waiting for something to arrive. I was standing alone beside the routing board when the station radio crackled, and my own voice whispered through the speaker, "Do not let it stop." Outside, snow hammered the windows hard enough to sound like gravel. The train slowed further, producing a low metallic groan that sounded less like machinery and more like structural strain deep inside the mountain. Then the brass lantern hanging beside the rear exit began swinging softly on its hook behind me. I turned instinctively toward it and felt my stomach drop because the lantern was lit. I had extinguished it less than 20 minutes earlier. The radio crackled again. "You cleared track 7, my voice whispered. Then I saw someone standing beside the tracks outside holding another lantern low near their leg. The figure remained perfectly still despite the storm, coat unmoving while snow whipped violently around everything else. Then the station lights flickered once. And when they returned, the figure was standing much closer to the building. 3 nights earlier. I took the Blackwater Pass assignment because nobody else wanted it. That's usually how remote railroad jobs work. The isolated winter stations, the mountain relay points, the old freight corridors buried so deep in wilderness that storms become more dangerous than mechanical failure. They get passed quietly from operator to operator until they eventually land on someone desperate enough to stop asking questions. At the time, I qualified perfectly. My name is Owen Mercer. 38 years old. 12 years working signal routing for Northern Continental Rail before the Riverton incident turned my name into something supervisors suddenly avoided saying out loud. Officially, nobody blamed me for the derailment in Wyoming. The company called it systemic operational failure during severe weather conditions. Unofficially, one engineer lost his leg after an emergency diversion I approved during a blizzard. After that, the company became very interested in placing me somewhere far away from lawsuits, investigators, and active freight operations. The road into Blackwater Pass looked abandoned. Snow buried the highway shoulders so deeply that the asphalt appeared carved through frozen walls of ice and earth. Pine forests crowded both sides of the road in endless dark columns, while utility poles leaned sideways beneath layers of frozen wind buildup. I drove nearly 2 hours without seeing another vehicle, and sometime after sunset, I started getting the uncomfortable sensation that I wasn't traveling toward a destination anymore, but was instead crossing gradually into a place entirely disconnected from the rest of the world. The station finally appeared through the storm as 3 faint signal lights glowing above the rail corridor. Blackwater Pass sat elevated on a ridge overlooking 7 converging tracks that split east and west through the mountains toward freight lines deeper inside Montana. The station itself looked older than I expected. Dark brick walls, reinforced windows rimmed with frost, steel roofing almost buried beneath snowdrifts. It had the cold, practical appearance of wartime infrastructure. Durable, ugly, and completely indifferent to human comfort. The tracks spread outward beneath the snowfall in 7 directions. 6 of them looked normal. Snow accumulation between the rails. Ice buildup near the switch housings. Wind drifts powder unevenly across the steel lines. Track 7 looked different immediately. Perfect exposed rails disappearing north into the forest without any visible snow buildup at all. I remember slowing my truck near the platform just to stare at it because the contrast bothered me instinctively. No scheduled freight traffic used the Northern Line anymore, according to the paperwork I'd received before transfer. Track 7 had supposedly been decommissioned years earlier after structural instability deeper in the mountains made winter routing unsafe. Yet the rails looked polished. Recently used. Like trains still pass through often enough to keep the steel warm beneath the storm. The old operator met me inside the station office before I could finish unloading my gear. Walter Grady. Late 60s, maybe. Thin frame. Gray beard. Railroad jacket zipped all the way to his throat despite the heavy radiator heat inside the building. He carried himself with the permanent forward lean common in men who spend decades working around cold weather machinery. "You're Mercer," he said immediately after I stepped inside. Not a question. Just recognition. When I nodded, he studied me for another second longer than normal people usually do after mentioning someone connected to a workplace accident, then motioned toward the office interior. The station smelled like machine oil, electrical dust, overheated pipes, and old coffee. Half the relay systems looked older than I was. Mechanical routing boards lined one wall beside newer digital equipment awkwardly integrated into the original infrastructure. Railroad stations age strangely. Nothing ever gets fully replaced. New systems simply grow around old ones until the entire building becomes layers of different decades stitched together. Walter handed me maintenance schedules first. Generator procedures. Switch diagnostics. Freight timing logs. Then he reached into a desk drawer and slid over a folded yellow sheet of paper. "These matter more," he said quietly. I unfolded it, expecting emergency storm protocols or backup routing instructions. Instead, I found 5 handwritten rules. Never manually clear Track 7 after midnight. If Signal 7 activates without dispatch authorization, confirm all switch alignments before touching the board. Do not answer radio transmissions that repeat your exact words back to you. If you see lantern lights north of the station during snowfall, remain inside until they disappear. The 213 train does not stop here anymore. I remember reading the list twice before looking back up at him, waiting for some indication he was joking. Walter never smiled. Outside, wind rattled softly against the station windows while old relay systems clicked somewhere deeper inside the walls. "Just follow them," he said. "Blackwater's manageable as long as you don't start trying to explain it to yourself." For reasons I couldn't fully articulate yet, that sentence stayed with me much longer than the rules themselves did. The first week at Blackwater Pass almost convinced me the rules were nothing more than mountain superstition. That happens in isolated workplaces. People trapped alone with repetitive routines eventually start assigning meaning to coincidences because the human brain hates empty patterns. I'd seen it before on winter freight lines in Colorado, where operators swore abandoned maintenance tunnels produced voices during storms, and again in Idaho, where an overnight dispatcher became convinced certain locomotives only appeared during snowfall. Isolation changes people slowly enough that they rarely notice it happening to themselves. That's the explanation I kept giving myself during those first nights at Blackwater. The station operated mostly through automated systems linked to regional dispatch in Helena. My responsibilities were straightforward: monitor signal continuity, inspect switch temperatures during storms, log freight movement, maintain generator backups, and respond to emergency rerouting requests if weather closed sections of track further south. Quiet work. Predictable work. Exactly the kind of assignment someone in my position needed after Riverton. The isolation settled over me faster than I expected. I slept in the small living quarters above the station office during the afternoons and worked nights beneath the constant hum of relay systems and radiator pipes. Outside, the mountains existed in a permanent state of frozen silence, broken only by distant freight engines somewhere beyond the ridges. Blackwater developed routines quickly. Coffee at midnight. Generator inspection at 2. Signal checks every 40 minutes. Dispatch confirmations at 3:15. The repetition became strangely comforting. Some nights, storms swallowed the entire rail yard so completely that the signal lights appeared suspended in empty white darkness with no visible poles beneath them. Other nights, the sky cleared enough for moonlight to reflect off the snowfield surrounding the station, turning the mountains pale silver beneath the trees. Through all of it, Track 7 remained the only thing that consistently bothered me. Not because anything happened there initially. Because nothing did. Every morning, the northern rails remained clear of snow buildup while the other 6 tracks accumulated fresh layers overnight, like something still traveled the line regularly enough to keep the steel warm. The first unusual incident happened on my 5th night. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Signal 7 briefly activated green before immediately returning to red. I checked the routing board automatically. No scheduled traffic. No dispatch authorization. No switch movement across the northern corridor. Probably relay bounce. Old systems do that sometimes during severe weather conditions. Ice interferes with electrical continuity. Voltage fluctuations create phantom activations. Still perfectly rational. Still explainable. But the timing bothered me immediately because I remembered Rule 5 the moment the signal changed. The 213 train does not stop here anymore. There is no 213 train. Not Track 7 is abandoned. The wording implied continuation, like something still moved through Blackwater, whether the company officially acknowledged it or not. The next evening, I mentioned the signal flicker casually during a dispatch check-in with Helena. There was a short silence on the line before the dispatcher finally answered. "You saw green?" he asked quietly. "Only for a second," I said. Another pause followed before he responded, "Probably weather interference." His tone shifted immediately afterward, professional again, controlled, but for a moment, he had sounded genuinely uneasy. After that, I started noticing smaller things. The station radios occasionally produced brief bursts of static around 2 in the morning, even during clear weather. Once, while reviewing track camera feeds, I noticed a single frame where the snow beside track 7 appeared disturbed in a long parallel pattern, almost resembling footprints. Another nig. I found the brass lantern hanging beside the rear exit already lit when I came downstairs for my shift, despite clearly remembering extinguishing it before bed. Individually, every incident had explanations. Faulty relays. Memory lapses. Wind distortion on low-resolution cameras. That became the pattern at Blackwater. Nothing impossible ever happened directly. Just ordinary things arriving in combinations. My brain struggled to organize comfortably. The mountains contributed to it, too. Wind moved through the rail corridors in strange ways during storms, creating low hollow sounds that occasionally resembled distant voices if you listened too long. Freight horns echoed unpredictably through the ridges. Metal contraction beneath severe cold produced noises that sounded unsettlingly human at the wrong hour of the night. I understood all of this rationally because I'd worked mountain lines before. But understanding something intellectually and experiencing it alone at 3 in the morning are very different things. On my 7th night, I accidentally broke Rule 3 without realizing it. I was logging switch temperatures during moderate snowfall when the station radio crackled beside me. "Blackwater, confirm north alignment," a voice said. "Normal dispatch procedure." I answered automatically. "North alignment confirmed." The radio immediately repeated, "North alignment confirmed." My exact voice. Perfectly matched. Same cadence. Same breathing. Same slight rasp from dry mountain air. I froze with a microphone still in my hand while silence settled across the station afterward. No further transmission. No dispatcher response. Eventually, I convinced myself it was signal feedback. Mountain weather sometimes bounced radio transmissions unpredictably between relay towers. Still rational. Still explainable. But when I looked toward the routing board afterward, track 7 was glowing green again. This time, it stayed illuminated for nearly 5 full seconds before returning quietly to red. The first real mistake I made at Blackwater happened because I got comfortable. That's usually how situations like this begin. Not through recklessness or curiosity, but routine slowly convinces you that danger isn't real because nothing terrible has happened yet. By my 10th night at the station, the rules already felt less like warnings and more like relics left behind by operators who had spent too many winters alone in the mountains. I still thought about the strange radio transmission occasionally, but even that had settled into something my brain could almost categorize. Signal bounce. Weather distortion. Old relay systems interact unpredictably under severe cold. There are dozens of strange things that happen around rail infrastructure during mountain storms, and most of them sound supernatural until someone with enough technical experience explains them correctly. That was the framework I kept forcing everything into because the alternative required believing something I wasn't prepared to believe. The storm arrived shortly after midnight. Not normal snowfall, a mountain storm. The kind that transforms the world outside into moving white static. Wind hammered the station walls hard enough to vibrate the relay cabinets while snow swept sideways across the tracks in dense silver sheets beneath the signal lights. Visibility dropped so low that the northern corridor disappeared completely beyond the first quarter mile. At 1:46 a.m., the routing board flashed amber across track 7. Switch fault. Signal interruption. Thermal line instability. I checked the diagnostics immediately. Heating systems still active. Voltage normal. No physical obstruction reported through the automated sensors. Then the communication line to Helena failed. I tried the backup frequency. Static. Under normal conditions, I would have stayed inside until visibility improved before attempting manual inspection, but mountain rail lines become dangerous quickly during storms. Ice forms around switch points faster than most people realize, and if a frozen switch locks incorrectly beneath a moving freight line, the results are catastrophic. That's the thing about railroad work. Procedures exist because steel doesn't forgive mistakes. So I made what felt like a rational decision. I grabbed the brass lantern, pulled on my insulated coat, and stepped outside toward the northern tracks. Technically, I hadn't broken any rules yet. Track 7 wasn't green. There were no strange radio transmissions. No lantern lights except my own. Just maintenance work during severe weather. The cold hit like a physical impact the moment I left the station. Wind tore through the rail corridor hard enough to make breathing painful while snow swirled across the tracks in dense, shifting waves. The station lights faded quickly behind me as I followed the maintenance path toward switch 7 with the lantern swinging beside my leg. That was another thing about Blackwater. Darkness there felt different from ordinary rural darkness. The mountains absorbed distance strangely during storms. Once you moved far enough from the station, the world seemed to collapse inward until only the immediate circle of lantern light existed anymore, and everything beyond it became suggestion rather than landscape. About halfway to the switch platform, I noticed the footprints. Fresh. Running parallel beside track 7. I stopped immediately and lowered the lantern closer to the snow. They weren't boot prints. Bare feet. Long, narrow impressions pressed clearly into the snow beside the rails. The stride spacing looked wrong, too. Too far apart to be comfortable walking distance. Not quite running either. More like something moving with unfamiliarity toward human motion. I remember crouching there trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Melt distortion, and maybe animal tracks reshaped by snowfall. Anything except the obvious conclusion, because there was no logical reason barefoot human tracks should exist out there in sub-zero temperatures nearly a mile from the nearest occupied structure. Then I saw another light further ahead through the storm. A lantern was swinging slowly beside the tracks. At first, I felt relief. Another work, or maybe maintenance crew. Someone normal. But the movement bothered me almost immediately. The lantern didn't bounce the way naturally carried light moves during walking. It glided side to side smoothly without vertical interruption, as though whoever held it wasn't crossing uneven ground at all. I should have returned to the station immediately. That's the part one think about most now. Not the fear afterward. The decision itself. Because nothing terrible had happened yet. That's what traps people in situations like this. Embarrassment. Rationality. The overwhelming human need for strange things to have normal explanations. I didn't want to become the paranoid night operator seeing ghosts in mountain weather after less than 2 weeks alone. So I kept walking until the switch platform finally emerged through the snowfall ahead. And the switch was already clear. No ice buildup. No obstruction. No mechanical failure anywhere. I stood there staring at perfectly functioning equipment while the wind screamed through the mountains around me. Then my radio crackled softly against my coat. My own voice whispered through the speaker, "You're standing too close." Every muscle in my body locked instantly. I turned toward the forest beside the tracks, lantern trembling slightly in my hand. Nothing stood there. Only trees are moving through the blowing snow. But the snowfall beneath the trees had changed somehow. It drifted downward normally through open air, then stopped, reaching the ground roughly 8 feet above the forest floor, like something enormous overhead blocked it from falling further. Then, behind me, track 7 turned green. And somewhere deep in the mountains beyond the storm, I heard a train horn. Long, low. Close enough that the rails beneath my boots vibrated softly in response. I made it back to the station faster than I thought possible. By the time the building lights emerged through the storm again, my lungs burned from cold air, and my gloves were stiff with ice. The entire northern corridor behind me had disappeared back into white darkness, but I could still feel the faint vibration of the rails beneath my boots long after the train horn faded. Inside, the warmth of the control room felt strangely artificial, almost temporary, like the station itself existed on borrowed time against whatever waited beyond the tracks. The routing board still showed track 7 glowing green. I attempted resetting the line manually 3 separate times before the system finally obeyed and switched back to red. Then every relay cabinet inside the station clicked at once. Not random mechanical chatter. Simultaneous activation. The sound echoed sharply through the walls before stopping altogether. Silence settled across the building immediately afterward, thick enough that I became painfully aware of the radiator pipes ticking behind me and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the station radioactively itself. No call tone. No dispatch identifier. Just static rolling softly through the speaker while the northern signal light outside shifted from red to green again without authorization. I stared at the radio for several seconds before finally reaching toward it, and the moment my fingers touched the microphone, the static stopped. Then a voice whispered through the speaker. "Blackwater Pass. Confirm arrival." Not my voice this time. Older. Male. Calm enough to sound professional. Somewhere behind the transmission, I could hear another noise beneath the static. Distant metal grinding against metal in slow, uneven intervals. I didn't answer. The silence stretched nearly 15 seconds before the voice returned. Slightly closer this time. "Signal operator. Confirm arrival." The wording bothered me immediately because freight communication doesn't work like that. Trains don't announce arrivals before entering isolated junctions. Dispatch handles clearances long before locomotives reach station territory. But before I could decide whether to respond, Another sound echoed faintly through the radio. A train horn. Long low. The same sound I'd heard outside near Track 7. After that night, Blackwater changed. Not dramatically at first. Just enough that the station stopped feeling entirely predictable. Small things began happening too consistently to dismiss comfortably. The clocks inside the control room occasionally froze for several seconds at 2:13 before correcting themselves. The station cameras monitoring the northern corridor started producing corrupted footage between 1 and 3 in the morning. Static distortions, missing frames, sudden image warping that looked almost organic beneath the snow. Twice, I found fresh moisture pooled beneath the rear exit door despite temperatures far below freezing outside. Another night, I discovered muddy footprints leading halfway across the station platform before disappearing completely near Track 7. Not entering the building. Not leaving it. Just ending abruptly in open snow. I stopped mentioning incidents to Helena Dispatch after realizing every conversation produced the same uncomfortable silence before someone quietly changed the subject. The worst incident happened 4 nights after the storm. I was reviewing maintenance logs shortly after midnight when I noticed an older filing cabinet near the rear office standing partially open. I could have sworn it had been locked earlier. Inside were decades of handwritten reports from previous Blackwater operators, most of them routine maintenance records dating back nearly 40 years. Buried between them, however, I found something else. Incident reports. Missing personnel statements. Unscheduled line activity records. Every document referenced Track 7. One report described an overnight dispatcher hearing freight communications from trains that officially didn't exist. Another mentioned signal operators witnessing lantern lights moving north through snowstorms despite no maintenance crews being scheduled in the area. Then I found Walter Grady's handwriting near the bottom of a maintenance log dated 11 years earlier. If Signal 7 activates at 2:13, do not acknowledge incoming traffic under any circumstances. It uses recognition. No explanation. No additional notes. Just that single sentence was written hard enough to tear slightly through the paper beneath it. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwater, I began seriously considering the possibility that nobody at Northern Continental had sent me there because they believed the station was safe anymore. The deeper I dug into the Blackwater records, the more I realized the station had been quietly accumulating incidents for decades without anyone fully acknowledging them. Most of the documents hidden inside the rear filing cabinet were incomplete. Pages missing. Dates scratched out. Entire sections were blacked over with thick marker, as if someone had tried removing specific details without destroying the reports entirely. But certain patterns appeared repeatedly. Unscheduled signal activation on Track 7 at 2:13 a.m. radio transmissions originating from freight lines were officially removed from operation years earlier. Operators reporting lantern lights moving north through storms despite thermal cameras showing no visible personnel outside. One maintenance report from the late 1980s described an engineer refusing to continue westbound service after claiming he saw people standing beside the northern line watching the train pass without sinking into the snow. Another document mentioned a temporary signal operator named Daniel Kerr who disappeared during a blizzard after manually overriding Track 7 during a communication failure. The report listed exposure as the probable cause even though his body was never recovered. What unsettled me most wasn't the incidents themselves. It was the tone of the paperwork. Nobody sounded surprised anymore. The reports read like recurring maintenance problems everyone expected eventually. I started sleeping badly after that. Not because I believed in ghosts or supernatural explanations, but because my brain could no longer comfortably categorize what was happening around me. Real fear doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates slowly through contradiction. Every strange event at Blackwater still possessed some individual explanation if isolated carefully enough. Faulty radios. Corrupted camera systems. Psychological stress from isolation. But together they formed something larger that refused to organize itself logically. The station itself began feeling different after midnight. Not haunted exactly. More aware. I'd catch myself glancing toward the northern windows without realizing why, or suddenly noticing the relay systems had gone completely silent for several seconds before resuming normal operation the moment I paid attention. One night, I woke upstairs around 3 in the morning, convinced someone had walked slowly across the station platform beneath my bedroom window. By the time I looked outside, the snowfall had already buried everything except a single line of footprints leading toward Track 7 before disappearing into darkness. 3 days later, the weather cleared enough for me to inspect the abandoned northern record shed behind the station. Walter had mentioned it once during my first shift, but told me most of the old storage areas were unsafe due to structural decay. The shed sat roughly 200 yards beyond the main platform, near the edge of the tree line, half buried beneath drifting snow and leaning slightly sideways from years of mountain storms. Inside, The air smelled like frozen paper, rust, and wet timber. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with old signal maps and maintenance logs dating back nearly 70 years. Most of it was useless. Then I found the photographs. Black and white rail images stored inside a sealed metal case marked Northern Expansion Project, 1954. Freight crews standing beside locomotives. Engineers posing near mountain tunnels. Construction teams along the northern corridor. In almost every photo, Track 7 appeared somewhere in the background. And in several of them, distant figures stood near the tree line beyond the rails. Not workers. Not crew members. The same long dark coats appeared repeatedly across different decades of photography, despite the people wearing them never being identified anywhere in the attached records. At the bottom of the case, I found Walter Grady's personal notebook. The first half contained ordinary station observations, signal maintenance reminders, switch temperatures, and generator fuel calculations. Then the writing changed. The entries became shorter, more erratic. Entire pages focused on Track 7 activity during storms. It mimics recognition before approach. Do not respond if it uses familiar voices. The line remembers previous operators. Then, near the end, I found an entry dated 11 years earlier describing the exact night Daniel Kerr disappeared. According to Walter, Kerr received an unauthorized freight transmission at 2:13 during a severe blizzard. The voice on the radio identified itself as an incoming maintenance train requesting clearance through the northern corridor. Kerr manually opened Track 7 after failing to contact Helena Dispatch. Witnesses later reported hearing a train pass through Blackwater despite no scheduled freight existing anywhere near the line that night. Walter's final sentence stopped me cold the moment I read it. Whatever uses the track cannot enter unless someone acknowledges its arrival. After reading Walter's notebook, I stopped treating the original rules like superstition. I didn't suddenly believe in ghosts or cursed trains or anything dramatic like that, but I could no longer deny that something real was happening around Track 7. Whether it was psychological, environmental, or something else, I still lacked the language to explain properly didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the pattern. Every serious incident is connected back to acknowledgement. Responses. Permissions. Recognition. The thing using the Northern Line, whatever it actually was, seemed unable to fully interact with the station unless someone treated it like legitimate rail traffic. That realization changed how I behaved at Blackwater almost immediately. I stopped answering unscheduled radio calls after midnight entirely. I disabled the external speaker system near the northern platform. I began recording every signal fluctuation in a separate notebook instead of entering them into the official station logs because Helena Dispatch never responded naturally whenever Track 7 incidents appeared in reports. It felt less like the company was unaware of the problem and more like everyone had silently agreed certain things were safer left undocumented. I also created my own rules. Not written formally at first. Just habits. Never look directly toward the northern tree line if the signal activates by itself. Never approach Track 7 during snowfall without first checking the relay clocks. If the station goes completely silent after 2 a.m., leave the radio untouched, no matter what voice comes through it. Most importantly, never assume something outside the station is human simply because it moves like one. That last rule came after the footprints returned. I found them one morning crossing the platform outside the control room. Bare feet again. Narrow impressions pressed clearly into the snow despite temperatures cold enough to freeze exposed skin solid within minutes. The tracks led toward the rear maintenance entrance and stopped directly outside the door. Not turned around. Not continued elsewhere. Just ended there like whoever made them had simply ceased existing. I remember standing there beneath the pale morning light, staring at the final footprint while an overwhelming instinct told me not to open the door behind it. The station itself seemed to react to my behavior after that. The more cautious I became, the more aggressive the disturbances grew. Radios activated randomly throughout the night now, often using voices I recognized from earlier points in my life. My old supervisor from Riverton is asking for routing confirmation. My father's voice calling my name from the dispatch line, despite him being dead nearly 6 years. Once, while checking signal diagnostics near 213, I heard my own voice speaking quietly from somewhere upstairs in the living quarters, even though I was alone in the building. The words themselves remained indistinct, hidden beneath the hum of relay systems and radiator pipes, but the tone sounded conversational, almost relaxed, like someone speaking casually to another person inside the apartment above me. I never went upstairs to investigate. That became another rule. If the station produces sound suggesting another person is inside, remain where you are until morning. Then came the first time I saw the train clearly. The storm that night was lighter than usual, just steady snowfall drifting across the corridor beneath the signal lights. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every clock inside Blackwater froze simultaneously. Not flickered. Stopped. The relay systems fell silent. Even the radiator pipes seemed to lose pressure all at once. Then Signal 7 activated green without authorization. I moved toward the northern window instinctively and saw it emerging through the trees beyond the ridge. Massive black freight cars slide slowly between the snow-covered pines without producing visible exhaust or wheel sparks. The train moved too smoothly. Real locomotives struggle against mountain grades during winter weather. They groan, vibrate, fight the tracks beneath them. This thing glided forward with the unnatural steadiness of something unaffected by weight entirely. And standing beside several of the passing freight cars were figures holding lanterns. Motionless silhouettes illuminated by pale yellow light, while the train continued moving around them. Watching the station. Watching me. Then one of the figures slowly lifted its lantern higher toward the window, and the station radio beside me whispered in Walter Grady's voice, "It knows you've started making rules." After the train appeared outside the station, Blackwater stopped pretending to behave like a normal place. The disturbances became deliberate, intelligent. It no longer felt like random anomalies scattered through old infrastructure, but a system actively reacting to my presence. The radios began activating almost every night between 2 and 3 in the morning, sometimes using dispatch voices, sometimes people I knew personally, sometimes my own voice speaking calmly enough to make my skin crawl. One night, the station intercom crackled alive and announced arriving freight schedules for trains removed from operation decades earlier. Another night, every signal along the northern corridor activated green simultaneously despite the routing system showing no authorized traffic anywhere within 50 miles. I stopped sleeping properly after that. Even during daylight, the station carried a constant pressure beneath its normal mechanical sounds, like something waiting patiently just outside perception. And the worst part was how quickly my fear became routine. Human beings adapt to almost anything eventually, even terror, if it happens gradually enough. The breaking point came during another blizzard 6 nights later. Visibility had collapsed almost completely by midnight while wind shook the station hard enough to rattle the relay cabinets against the walls. Around 2:07 a.m., the northern signal board activated itself. Not just Track 7 this time. Every abandoned line beyond the station lit green together while the routing system screamed fault warnings across the control room. Then the radios all activated simultaneously. Different voices layered over each other through overlapping static. Dispatch operators. Engineers. Freight confirmations. Some voices are crying. Some laughed quietly. Beneath all of them, I heard the same low metallic groan I'd noticed the night of the first storm, the sound resembling structural strain deep inside the mountain itself. Then one voice cut clearly through the others. "Walter Grady. Do not let it stop," he said calmly. "If it stops completely, it stays." The transmission ended immediately afterward, plunging the station into silence so sudden it physically hurt my ears. Then came the knocking. 3 slow impacts against the rear maintenance door. Not loud. Controlled. Human. I stood frozen beside the routing board listening while snow hissed softly against the windows. Another 3 knocks echoed through the station. The rear entrance sat directly beside Track 7. Nobody could have reached it without crossing the northern platform during a wideout severe enough to erase visibility. Then the knocking changed locations. 3 impacts against the side windows overlooking the tracks. Then another set against the front platform entrance. Something was moving around the building impossibly fast without producing footsteps or opening doors. I remember gripping the brass lantern so tightly my hand cramped while every instinct screamed at me not to look outside. Then the station lights flickered once, and for half a second I saw silhouettes standing beyond every visible window. Motionless figures holding lanterns beneath the storm. When the lights stabilized again, they were gone. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the train arrived fully. Not partially visible through the snowfall this time. It emerged directly beside the station platform, close enough that I could see rust patterns along the freight cars and frost spreading across black steel beneath the wheels. The locomotive looked ancient, older than anything still operating on American rail systems, yet it moved with unnatural smoothness across the tracks without producing the violent vibration real freight engines create. Every window along the passing cars remained dark except for occasional pale movement behind the glass, resembling people turning slowly toward the station as they passed. Then the train began braking. Metal screamed through the mountains hard enough to vibrate the building foundation beneath me. The station radio activated one final time, and my own voice whispered through the speaker, "You redirected the line at Riverton." My stomach dropped instantly because no official report connected me directly to the routing error that caused the derailment in Wyoming. That information existed only inside confidential internal investigations. Outside, the train finally stopped moving, and one of the doors along the nearest freight car slowly began sliding open. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The freight car door slid open inch by inch with a long metallic scrape that echoed through the mountains while snow drifted sideways across the platform outside. Beyond the opening was only darkness. Not ordinary darkness either. Real darkness still reflects something eventually. Light, movement, depth. Whatever filled the inside of that car looked completely flat, like the absence of space rather than the interior of a train. The station radio hissed softly beside me while every relay system inside Blackwater remained silent for the first time since I arrived. Then a voice spoke from inside the freight car. Not through the radio. Directly outside. "Signal operator," it said calmly. "Confirm arrival." The words sounded ordinary enough, almost professional, but there was something deeply wrong beneath the tone. It didn't sound like a person asking a question. It sounded like something repeating a phrase it had learned through repetition without understanding why humans used it. That was the moment I finally understood what Walter Grady had been trying to warn me about. The rules were never protection against a haunting. They were procedures designed to prevent acknowledgement. Everything at Blackwater revolved around permission, recognition, confirmation. Whatever existed beyond Track 7 needed human participation before it could fully enter the station. Every previous operator who disappeared had made the same mistake Daniel Kerr made years earlier. They treated the thing on the line like legitimate rail traffic. They answered the calls, cleared the switches, confirmed arrival. Railroad systems operate entirely on trust and acknowledgement. Signals only matter because human beings agree they matter. And somehow, somewhere along the history of Blackwater Pass, something had learned how to imitate the process without actually belonging to it. The voice outside repeated itself, slightly louder this time. Confirm arrival. Then another voice joined it from deeper inside the freight car. Then another. Different tones. Different ages. Some male. Some female. All were repeating the same phrase in perfect synchronization, while the storm outside suddenly went silent. Not quieter. Silent. No wind. No snowfall against the windows. Nothing. It felt like the entire mountain had stopped breathing. Then I saw movement near the platform. The lantern figures again. At least 6 of them were standing motionless beside the train while pale yellow light swung softly from their hands. One figure stood closer than the others near the edge of Track 7, and even through the storm-darkened windows, I recognized the shape of Walter Grady's railroad jacket immediately. The figure slowly lifted its lantern toward the station door. Not threatening. Inviting. That's when I broke the pattern. Not because I was brave. Because I finally realized the station itself was part of the system, keeping the thing alive. The signals. The radios. The relay boards. Everything inside Blackwater existed to recognize arrivals and authorize movement through the line. As long as the systems remained operational, the thing beyond Track 7 could keep attempting entry forever. I grabbed the emergency fuel axe mounted beside the generator controls and swung it directly into the primary relay cabinet. Sparks exploded across the control room instantly while alarms screamed through the station. I hit the cabinet again. Then the backup routing systems. Then the communication board. Glass shattered. Metal buckled. The station lights flickered violently while the train outside produced a deep grinding noise loud enough to shake snow from the ceiling beams overhead. The voices outside changed immediately after the second relay board died. No longer calm. No longer human. Hundreds of overlapping sounds erupted from the freight cars at once. Distorted screaming, metallic shrieking, radio static, train horns, all merging into something so unnaturally loud I collapsed against the control desk, covering my ears. Then every light inside Blackwater went out simultaneously. And for the first time since arriving at the station, the train sounded afraid. When the emergency lights finally activated, the station looked like the inside of a wrecked machine. Sparks drifted lazily from shattered relay cabinets while the smell of burnt wiring and melted insulation filled the control room thick enough to sting my throat. Outside, the storm had returned violently, snow hammering the windows hard enough to blur the platform almost completely white. But the train was gone. No freight cars. No lantern figures. No black locomotive blocking Track 7. Just empty rails disappearing north into the forest beneath the storm. I remember sitting there on the floor for nearly 10 minutes with the fuel axe still clenched in my hand, trying to convince myself the silence outside meant it was over. Then I noticed the clocks. Every clock inside the station remained frozen at exactly 2:13 a.m. None of them moved again for the rest of the night. Northern Continental shut Blackwater Pass down less than 48 hours later. Officially, the company blamed a catastrophic electrical failure caused by severe winter weather, damaging the station's routing systems beyond repair. Emergency crews arrived shortly after sunrise, but even then, nobody wanted to stay near Track 7 longer than necessary. I watched two maintenance workers refuse to approach the northern platform after noticing the rails were warm beneath fresh snowfall despite the line being disconnected from active power entirely. Helena Dispatch never questioned the destroyed relay cabinets. Nobody asked why multiple system recordings between 2 and 3 in the morning had vanished completely from the station archives. Most unsettling of all, nobody reacted with surprise when I told them the northern line should remain permanently closed. They simply nodded like people hearing confirmation of something they already believed privately. Before leaving, I searched for Walter Grady's notebook inside the rear records office one final time. The cabinet where I'd hidden it stood empty. I left Montana 3 days later and never returned to railroad work again. For a while, I convinced myself that distance would make everything at Blackwater feel rational eventually. Sleep deprivation. Isolation. Psychological stress layered over unresolved guilt from Riverton. Human beings are remarkably capable of constructing explanations when reality becomes uncomfortable enough. But certain details refused to fit inside any explanation I created. About 2 months after leaving the station, I received a sealed envelope with no return address containing only a single black and white photograph. The image showed Blackwater Pass sometime during the 1950s. Freight workers stood beside the northern platform, smiling toward the camera while snow drifted across the tracks behind them. And near the edge of the photograph, partially obscured by storm